Welcome to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Noethling. You are about to discover impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you, so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Be sure you visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now tune in, get ready, and enjoy the journey of emerging as a leader of exception in the 21st century.
Welcome, everyone, to the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast. I'm your host, Vicki Noethling, coming to you from Roswell, Georgia. The goal of this podcast is to bring topics and guests that will empower you to become that confident leader and take your business and your life to the next level. Today, we are having a continuation of the conversation that we've been having with Jen Thornton. And today, we are pleased to have her back once again. So, Jen, thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be back and always good to have another conversation with you.
So today I thought, as I promised you in our earliest episode, that we would talk about global teams. So today the theme is keeping global teams motivated. So once again, Jen, we are going to get going right away into this topic. As always, I want to know, how did you get interested in helping your clients with remote teams? What was your past experience, or maybe in some cases trauma of dealing with remote teams?
So I've never led an in-person team in my entire career. And so I grew up in operations in the field. And so the first time I was managing multiple units as a district manager, they were different units. They were all around the city that I lived in. They were, remote, not remote as we think of it today. This was, a while ago, but I had, an entire state. I had 7 locations. They were kind of, all different directions, and, no city had more than 2 locations. And so that's just how I thought you led. I never thought that I never crossed my mind like how it would work if everyone was in the same building, which is really funny because, over time I went from operations into HR. So I was in a corporate setting, but I was still always remote before most people were remote, because I did the HR on the operation side. So I had to be out in the operation field. And then over time, I took a special assignment in Hong Kong, and off I went to Hong Kong. And it was really probably the first time, it was later in my career, that I went to the same office every day. And so I actually had the opposite experience. I had to learn how to lead people that looked at me all day long. I was like, hey, we had our touch base Tuesday. What are you still doing here? And so that's all I've ever done. And, gosh, it's been 4 years ago now when the world went remote. All of my clients were freaking out, like, how am I going to lead people? I'm like, oh, it's easy. It's the same thing. And I was really wrong. I can admit that I was really wrong, because it was normal for me, but it doesn't mean it was normal for everybody else. And what I learned in that time period, as watching my clients try to lead remotely, is anything you struggled with as a leader when everyone was in the building, you will struggle 10 times more if it's a remote team. So if you were not consistent with your behaviors, you become more inconsistent. If you were not consistent with your communication, or had strong communication skills and could really explain something to someone once quickly and let them get that, if you couldn't do that in office, you were really going to struggle to do it remotely. And so, that's kind of my experience with remote work. I've never really led a team all in one place. So this just seems like what everyone would be doing in my brain.
Yeah. So for me, I worked for the last company that I worked for. Almost all of the teams that we worked with were remote, at least a portion of them, some of them in person. But what I found when I came back in 21, they had called me back to do a special project. And it's really interesting, the thing you said that you struggle with, because for me, whenever you do projects that have a technical aspect to it, So you have this somewhat often
Mhm.
a internal battle between the IT folks and everyone else. And so the way that I managed that whenever we were in person or meeting in the office every day that you could keep on top of everything was I constantly put more effort towards the communication with the IT people to build confidence and all the things that were necessary to keep everyone playing nicely. When I tried to do this project where everyone was 100% remote, I couldn't get to people to build relationships with them easily. It was almost like a train wreck ready to happen. So I had to like double and triple and make sure that things were done right. And it was a lot of work.
Mhm.
And some of the results were not what I would have wanted if I would have been in person.
Yeah. And I think that, again, we learn when we're leading remote teams, we really learn where we have the opportunity to grow. And again, if a leader, not this wasn't your situation, but if a leader, doesn't go out of their way to build those cross-functional partnerships in person, well, you really are going to be in a bad shape when you're remote because you don't bump into them in the lunchroom. You don't bump into them in the hallway and have those sidebar conversations. You have to be incredibly purposeful. And it's one of the things when I started working with my clients when they went remote, I was like, who are your most important business partners and why? And they're like, oh, so and so, but we don't have anything. I'm like, no. Who's your most important ones? Like, who are your influencers? And you need to schedule time to catch up with them. Schedule time outside of the meetings. And I know no one wants more meetings on top of meetings, but that's a whole nother subject. I don't understand why we have so many meetings because, if you're on a meeting and you didn't share something, you didn't answer a question, make a decision, then you shouldn't have been there. You just
Mhm.
shouldn't have been there. But that's a whole another conversation for another day. But we have to make time to get to know people. We have to have discipline that not just jump into work, but just say, how are you? A lot of time is thank you for helping me with this project. What do you need help with that I can support you with? And it is a lot of kind of that push pull conversation of this is what I need, but what do you need? And
Mhm.
really being compassionate towards your peers and understanding what they do helps you be a better leader in your own team, make better decisions, but it also helps you know how to support them better and build those relationships so that things get done. Because there's always more work than anyone can get to. We all have those things that are on our to-do list for like 2 weeks, and all of a sudden we didn't do it and it disappears, right? So it shouldn't have been there in the
Mhm.
first place. And you don't want to be that thing that just disappears on someone's to-do list. You want to be someone's like, hey, this person's really great. They've done a ton for me. If they need something, I will figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah. So I think another area when we talk about some challenges and opportunities is just in that first 30, 60, 90 days of the team starting or you hiring someone, that orientation,
Mhm.
especially for remote people, it must not be missed or
Yeah.
overlooked.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Whether you're domestically all, scattered around domestically, or you have an international team, that first 90 days allows someone to figure out how do I connect in. And I have a client, we worked really hard because they have a pretty remote organization. We worked really hard on how we looked at onboarding. And their first 2 weeks is a list of their key business partners, what that person does and why it's important to them and why it's important to their success. And then in those first 2 weeks, they have one-on-ones with every single person on that list. And so they immediately start to learn, who do I call? When do I call them? How do I build those relationships? Like, who's this person where I'm
Mhm.
like, oh my gosh, I can't figure this out. And I don't want to really bother my boss with it, but who could I call? They start to build those relationships. But that is
Mhm.
one of our very first things before we even teach them go really in depth in their own job, we teach them who their partners are and why their partners are important, because it sends a message. Whatever you learn first, is important.
And I think you made a really key point there. And this is true not only remote, but maybe more so remote, is when you get those contacts, when you find those people that are willing to help you and you can reciprocate at any time, having that list, we used to have a Rolodex, if you will, but that list of people that you can go to, it's so important to build those relationships. And that makes you more of an asset. And when we talk about having to determine who gets promoted and who gets moved and opportunities provided, those are the people that are doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's nothing worse being a new person and being like, I don't know who does this. I'm supposed to get this done. I'm supposed to call someone, but I don't know who that is. And you think about efficiency, learning how to do your job is hard. And so your first, up to a year, you're still learning how to do it all. And so you don't get kind of that economy of scale and that speed and all of those things. But if you can help someone from the very beginning understand how they connect into the team, how the team connects into them, then they're able to make decisions faster, get things done. And it also takes burden off the leader. If you're having to ask your leader 100 times a day on Teams, who do I call for this? Who do I call for that? And that leader's like, oh my gosh, do that. Like, they're just overwhelmed. It's because you didn't set that person up for success.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And when we talk about who to call, but also the training aspect, we know that a lot of times companies, that's the first thing that goes when they are trying to cut corners and be more profitable is to stop formal training. So how important, though, from a remote aspect, and the training can't be in person often. So how important is it that you put in place online training and opportunities for, from time to time, bringing people in to train them and develop them and really mentor them?
Yeah, it is really important. And there's a ton of amazing online programs, LinkedIn Learning, and, there's just a ton of different things out there. But what that doesn't offer is the ability to learn as a group. And I will tell you, being able to collectively learn is incredibly powerful. And we do not give that enough credit. We just say, well, we told you to watch that video. Why don't you know exactly how to do this? And so, we here at 304, we have a lot of leadership academies, and we call them academies because it's a group of people and it's over time. And so you can't just lock, 10 people in a conference room for 3 days and expect they come out new people. We don't change that fast. And so when you really think about adult education, you have to think about someone learning something on their own. You have to think about them learning something as a group and cross learning and learning from each other. You have to really think about the space and the reason why it's important. And you have to be more thoughtful than just, I want this person to learn how to have a coaching conversation, something simple like that. You have to really think about how do I want my teams to lead, and how do I create a program where people come together, whether that's in person or remote. I mean, I love a good in-person travel, but sometimes it's just over Zoom, and we do a ton of academies over Zoom, and we put them in cohorts. We break them into smaller groups, into rooms. We do a lot of different things to allow them to learn as a collective group, because that is some of the most powerful training, and it creates those relationships, those partnerships, all those things we've been talking about.
Yeah, I know, my trainings are usually 6 weeks long, and over Zoom oftentimes, especially since the people weren't getting involved in together. And it can be highly effective.
Yeah.
It's really not, it's just a non-negotiable, I think, for your company to say, well, we'll let them train on their own.
That's right.
It's such so much richer of training if you can do it with those people. And I also think it allows you as the leader, the manager, supervisor, whatever, to be exposed to that person being free to think and express themselves.
Mhm.
And then that identifies people that you may want to think about for your succession planning.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, you think about, motivating global teams, our topic, whether that's, when you think of global around the world, or you think that global domestically, but just maybe coast to coast, um, the satisfaction of growing together is incredibly powerful, and it's incredibly bonding. And that is one of the best ways to motivate people, is allow them to grow together, because then it's an experience. We all know of like our high school or college buddies, or a lot of you know city offices, or community offices have, like, leadership Dallas or leadership Atlanta. They have those programs, and those friends, right? They're a big
Mhm.
deal for you.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because you collectively grew together.
Yeah, and it really does form a community. As entrepreneurs, we have our community, but what you can have the same thing in your team and your group and your department, where just this group, just this group of people are building almost a family, to make it harder to leave. So,
Yes.
whenever we talked about the orientation, during that orientation time, I think it's important to ask questions that will really identify what individually would motivate that person, because it isn't a one size fits all.
Mm-mm.
I used to hate whenever I would have a suggestion for a way to recognize or reward teams, and that my manager would say, "Oh, well, that would set a precedent for the rest of the company." And I was like, "No, I just need it for my group. I don't,
Yeah.
nobody else has to do this." So let's talk about that for a little bit.
Mm. Yeah, I think rewarding people, it's not the world of we give pizza parties on Thursday. Reward comes from a lot of different ways. And, again, when you really understand your team, which you have to remotely, you have to know who they are. There was a time in which we were told leave home at the door, but when you went home, you could leave work at the door. And then we got Blackberries, and then all of a sudden, and we got laptops, and all of a sudden, work was coming into our home. Now, work was okay with that because it was kind of a one-way street, so it worked really well. You kept your personal life at home, but as work, you can, take me home and, never stop. But then COVID hit, and we just mushed together, and it's never going to come apart. It's just not. We're just going to live in this very, fluid, work and personal life world. And we just have to learn to lead on it, and getting to know people. If they've got dogs and it's a beautiful spring afternoon, you may say, "Hey, I don't have anything on my touch base for you today. Take this hour and go outside and play with your dogs." That's a reward. It
Yeah.
is a reward that is more powerful than a pizza party.
Hmm.
And it costs nothing. And, it could be, hey, like one of the girls on my team, she does some of her very best work after she's been outdoors, whether that's been hiking or climbing or riding her bike through somewhere. I will say to her, I'm like, "Hey, what's your weekend look like?" Because we have, some big projects coming up next week. And she'll be like, "Oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that." I'm like, "Where's your outdoor time?" And she's like, "Oh, you're right. I don't have any, like, I'm not going to, I need to kayak. I haven't kayaked, and the weather's going to be great." I'm like, "Awesome. I know you love going in the morning, Monday morning. Why don't you go kayaking Monday morning? We'll move our touch base to Monday afternoon." And so it's really small stuff
Yeah.
like that where she's going to do better work
Hmm.
because I know what makes her creative. But if I was like, "Whoa, well, I don't care what you do on the weekends. I don't care if you've had your, your refresh or outdoor time. I just need you to do your best work for me and just be quiet and be a robot," like we used to expect in our command
Yeah.
and control world. You just don't get it. You don't get the productivity. And so rewards don't have to be a trophy. Rewards don't have to be a certificate. Rewards are is recognizing someone that makes them interesting, that what's important to them, and allowing it to be important to them and respecting it. I think that's one of the biggest rewards you can give your employees in today's world.
Absolutely. And I think too, one of the areas that can be challenging is, but in the long run, a great opportunity to make that employee more effective is the communication piece. The way that you and that person or that team communicate needs to be established during that orientation, because just as you finding that that person is motivated by doing outdoor things, you might find the person will answer a text immediately, but if you email them, they may take a day or two to respond to it, or they might prefer Slack or WhatsApp or something. And establishing, okay, what is it that Jen needs for me to communicate with her that I can immediately get a response? Whereas if I send her an email, she knows it's not that important that I have to drop everything and take care of it. So let's discuss that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think that, just the list you listed off reminds us that we can over communicate. And that's a lot of overwhelm, is just being overly communicated to. Like, you've got your Slack open, you've got your text open, you got your WhatsApp open, you got your email open. Heaven forbid someone leave me a voicemail. I'm just going to tell you right now, I don't
Yes.
like my mother will be like, your voicemail's full. And I'm like, but why would, who cares? Like, that's the point. Don't leave me one. And
I'm
so
right there with you.
I know. And so there's just too much. So I think that really strong leaders, they narrow down the communication channels, because that narrows down overwhelm. And, and there's teams too. So you could have your Slack and your teams going. Boy, that would be but I
Awesome.
see it happen. And so it's about narrowing down the communication tools, and it's about narrowing down the instant gratification. Instead of saying, oh, I have this question, you just Slack someone, you stop and pause and say, can I answer this question myself? I have a touch base with this person tomorrow at 3. Can this wait? I'll just put it on my touch base form. It's about discipline. And I think that to help people with communication, you have to narrow and have discipline. And that's the foundation of where it starts. And then you won't have as much to manage.
Yeah. And I think the point you made about, can we do that tomorrow? That again goes back to what we talked about with the orientation, as well as just the day-to-day things, setting expectations. What do you expect of them, even from project to project? Well, with this project, this is my expectations. So that person knows, okay, well, this is not a have to respond to immediately. This can wait. Or, okay, whenever this comes across your table, if you have a customer complaint that only the management can deal with, that, has to go right away, type of thing. So I think that the communication is important in that respect. But an area that I think sometimes we as managers or owners of businesses fail to do is communicate what our vision is, what those people that are on our team, how what they do is tied to that vision and mission, because that is a motivator in itself. When I know that my piece of the puzzle is important to the puzzle, then I am more motivated to come to work every day and do my job at my best.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that helps us at work. If we know what we're responsible for, we know how we tie in, and we've got 100 things on our to-do list. When we know those things, not only does it help us get excited about doing the work, it helps us edit down what needs to be done. And, there's just always more work than time. And that is just the world we live in. And so if I know these 4 things are going to have the largest impact on the business, so the 4 things I do first, they're the 4 things I do the best. They're the 4 things that matter the most to me, and I never let slip. But if I don't really know that, and I'm just doing my best to check things off a list and don't really know why I'm doing it, it's not done with purpose. And in today's really incredibly overwhelmed too much information, too much communication, too much of too much. If you don't know how to edit your own work, edit your own thoughts, it'll be really difficult for you to be successful. And as a leader, you have to do that for your team so all of them can be successful.
Yeah. So one final thing before we end today is, to me, one of the ways that you are motivated is that you feel that you're being heard and understood. And you may have a manager that loves the sound of their voice and talks and never gives you a moment to share your thoughts and and acknowledge that they understood what you needed, what you felt. And so again, in our global teams, we talked about the different cultures. It may be that you think you said what they needed to hear and you heard what they said, but there is that aspect of now you have to put on your different cultural hat to be sure that, am I truly allowing them to be heard and I truly understand them?
Yeah, absolutely. And, when you're working in international teams, um, every culture is different. And you just have to remember that as different as they are to you, you are equally as different to them. And, back in, my corporate days, leading an international HR group, when I would take, executives international, it was one of the first things I said. I'm like, there's going to be things that they're going to say, how they're going to act, what they're going to do, and you're going to be offended. And you're like, that's weird. They're this, they're that. You are equally all of those things to them. And it's interesting, especially Americans, because sometimes we forget that we're not the only country in the world. Um, they just look at me like, I would never offend anyone. I would never be inappropriate. And I'm like, no, you are. Just thinking that you couldn't be is.
Yeah.
And when we work internationally, we have to just, really put our ego aside. We have to be really open to different ways of doing things. We have to remember, we have to really self-author. Self-authoring is saying nothing's happening to me. It's just happening. I choose how I look at it. I choose how I respond to it. And working international is a lot of that because,
Mhm.
they eat different foods. They, order food different in a restaurant. They, pick what seats are sitting at in a boardroom differently. Like there's just an unimaginable amount of things that will be different. And all of it is just happening because you're in a different location, and it's unique to them. And, really making it fascinating and curious and finding ways to learn about them, then what you'll find is they'll be curious about you. But if you're working on a global team, to really have a great connection, you have to be the most curious person in the world.
Yeah.
And if you're the most curious person in the world, in the room, then they'll be curious back because you've opened it up. And I just highly recommend being the curious one because it starts the trend.
Awesome. Well, I hope everyone has enjoyed this as much as I have. And if you want to connect with Jen to learn more about, what she does and maybe how she might help you with your teams to be more motivated in the global arena that you might be as your remote teams might be, then please take a moment and get the screenshot of what I'm going to be sharing. If you're just listening, please know that the website I will read, but everything is going to be on my YouTube channel, Vicki Noethling. Please subscribe, as well as my findyourleadershipconfidence.com. The show notes will be there. But if you are watching, please take a screenshot so you can connect with Jen as soon as you can. So the website is 304coaching.com. Again, that's 304coaching.com. You can connect with her on LinkedIn, Jennifer R. Thornton. Again, Jennifer R. Thornton. She does have a podcast, and it is Let's Fix Leadership. So please go to any of your favorite podcast groups. That's YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, whatever it might be, and check out her podcast. Again, Let's Fix Leadership. I'm going to turn it over to Jen to let you let her spend a few moments to talk about what it is that you might find when you go to that 304coaching.com that could help you work better with your teams.
Yeah, so check out our offerings at 304coaching.com. When you go there, you'll also find a lot of free resources you can download and different tools that you can use to help build your team and the way in which makes sense for you. And again, follow our podcast at Let's Fix Leadership, and love to connect with you on LinkedIn at Jen Thornton, ACC.
Awesome. Well, Jen, thanks so much for coming back on again and talking about keeping global teams motivated. I think you shared so much important information and tips for the audience, and hopefully they'll reach out and connect with you so that you can help them have more motivated teams. As always, I remind everyone that life is a journey, and it's up to you to enjoy the ride. This is Vicki Noethling, signing off.
Thank you for tuning into the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast with Vicki Noethling, where we share impactful lessons that help you grow as an individual, grow your confidence, and find the positive and good within you so you powerfully and authentically become the best version of yourself. Remember to visit our website at www.findyourleadershipconfidence.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Find Your Leadership Confidence podcast.